Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of the Gerardo couple in the tranquil suburbs of Delaware County, Pennsylvania. The lives of Jenner and Mark Gerardo appeared to mirror the idyllic setting. Professionally successful and socially accomplished, they seemed to be living the American dream. However, their story took an unforeseen and tragic turn that would shatter the calm of their suburban existence. Beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, Jenner and Mark, both accomplished individuals, harbored complexities that would evolve into a narrative of betrayal and heartbreak. Jenner Gerardo, born Jenner Cox on December 19, 1970, in the city of Fort Wayne, Allen County, Indiana, USA, grew up in the area until her late teenage years and was a graduate of Bishop Luers High School, where she took advanced courses. Jenner first attended Indiana University Purdue University at Indianapolis, where she studied communication and was deeply involved in the theater arts and performance program at the college. She also continued with her studies in communication at Butler University, earning her BA degree in communication and theater arts. Throughout her life, she held several jobs related to marketing for several companies in the Indiana area, working in the city of Carmel and also in Indianapolis. She was the marketing manager at Circor Instrumentation for several years. In the summer of 1986, Jenner Cox and Mark Gerardo first met in Fort Wayne, Indiana. They were both teenagers at the time, and Jenner worked at a Taco Bell in Fort Wayne. Mark said he was immediately attracted to Jenner from the moment they met. He commented on how her beautiful blue eyes and big smile had taken his breath away, and he was kind of tongue-tied and couldn't speak. Their romance didn't begin until 4 years later, after Mark ran into Jenner again and found out that she was working at a nearby mall. He started visiting her often, and one day, she pressed him to make a move, asking him when he was going to take her out. He said he was quite shy, and it was this honesty that drew Mark to Jenner. Mark said that Jenner was confident and unafraid to speak her mind, adding that her demeanor was the exact opposite of his. Melissa Murphy, a childhood friend of Jenner's, said she remembered when Jenner met Mark, and she said, "This is the one," and was so excited that she could do anything for Mark. On October 23, 1993, Mark and Jenner got married. Mark was 25 years old, and Jenner was 23 years old. Together, they established a relationship that began in their adolescence and carried them into adulthood. Mark said, "We were happy. I couldn't imagine not being with Jenner for the rest of my life." Just like any other relationship, Mark and his partner Jenner had to deal with low points in their marriage. He said that his arguments with his wife could be intense and that she would always have the last word. In November 2011, they both moved to Greenville, South Carolina, where they found new jobs in marketing. The new environment and their frequent exploration of the state's beautiful mountains and beaches brought a sense of restoration to their marriage, which had become stronger than before. Everything went well for the next few years, until 2017, when their renewed life in South Carolina came to a halt. Jenner had been laid off from her job and was having difficulty finding a new one. She lost confidence in herself and became much less strong than she had once been. Around this time, the couple decided it was time to search for new opportunities and a new beginning elsewhere. They finally decided that Delaware would be their new home, and Mark immediately began his search for a job opportunity. He saw that the University of Delaware was hiring a creative director in its marketing department, and if successful, he would be the supervisor. He sent an email applying for the role and received an instant message back from a woman 15 years his junior, who would be his new boss. Offering him an interview, his concerns about being managed by a younger woman subsided almost immediately. Meredith Chapman was a 33-year-old native of Pennsylvania. She had a bachelor's degree in communication and a master's degree in education from the University of Delaware. Meredith was married to Luke, a former New York City councilman, and they lived in Fairfield Crest, Delaware. When Mark attended the interview, he was immediately attracted to Meredith, not only for her beauty but also for her exceptional intelligence. Within 5 minutes of sitting across the desk from her, he thought to himself that he wanted to work for her. He was impressed by her articulation, energy, passion for the job, and her accomplishments at her young age. It seemed that Meredith was also impressed by Mark, as she immediately offered him the job, which he gratefully accepted. Mark moved to Wilmington, Delaware, in November 2017, while his wife stayed behind in South Carolina temporarily to lease their home. Mark was excited not only because of moving to the north but also to see growth in his career, not knowing that this would be the beginning of the end of his marriage with Jenner. Mark spent his first 45 days living alone in Delaware as his wife remained behind to arrange for their home to be rented out. During this time, Mark said he got to know Meredith well and also stated that the two had a lot in common. One day, Meredith had asked him out for a drink, and Mark remembered the events of that night. He found it easy to talk to Meredith, and before they had gone home, he spoke to her about his marriage to Jenner, even if it was not necessarily in a negative way. He also told Meredith about losing his parents and his brother. Mark didn't know what was transpiring, stating, "I really didn't know what was happening." He went on to say, "I knew it felt amazing to be around Meredith, and I was confused by the feelings I was having, to be honest, until it became a little bit more forward with the dinner that we had. It was more of a date." Mark said the issues with his marriage also came into focus when he was with Meredith. It was during this time that Mark started comparing Meredith to his wife. He stated that Meredith started telling him that he was good at what he does and how wonderful a man he was, something he said he had never heard from his wife's lips. Mark was hopelessly in love, stating, "That just made an impression on me. Here's this woman I think is amazing, saying that she thinks I'm a wonderful man." 1 month after meeting Meredith, Mark said that they kissed for the first time. He further stated that while he felt a strong connection, he immediately felt guilty for betraying his wife and told Meredith that whatever was about to happen couldn't be because he cared for his wife. Nonetheless, he soon realized that he also couldn't give up on the feelings he was developing for Meredith, who he said had told him she was 9 years into an unhappy marriage herself. Mark said, "I felt enthralled. The connection was so strong that shutting it down just didn't feel right. I had to at least find out what it was that drew us together." Before Jenner had joined him, Mark sensed he was distant. It wasn't long before she confronted him about her feeling that there could be another woman. Mark said she finally asked him, "What is up with you? You're acting different," he continued. She said specifically, "It's Meredith, isn't it?" This was after Mark had mentioned Meredith several times when speaking about his new job. Although her husband denied the affair at first, Jenner would not let it go. She continued to question his relationship with Meredith, aware that there was something between the two. Jenner began to pay attention to her husband, making sure she knew what he was up to at any given time. He further said that Jenner mysteriously knew things about him and Meredith, and he couldn't understand how she knew them. Close to Valentine's Day 2018, Jenner finally obtained the evidence she had been seeking. However, Mark's admission of an affair with Meredith came at the cost of Jenner revealing that she had hired a company to gain access to his phone, allowing her to read his text messages, view his photos, and review his call records with Meredith. Mark admitted the truth to Jenner, acknowledging that he had indeed fallen for Meredith, as he could no longer maintain the deception. Heartbroken but unwilling to give up on her marriage, Jenner asked Mark to attend marriage counseling, which he agreed to. But on the day of their second session, Mark said he was putting on his jacket when he felt something bulging in the lining of his coat. Even though at first he believed it to be an anti-theft device that had been left inside, he decided to cut the jacket open and discovered a recording device. With its lights already flashing, it was recording him at that very moment. At that particular time, Mark was furious and went ahead and confronted his wife. From then on, the relationship between Mark and Jenner would fall apart at an accelerated rate. Finally, Mark told Jenner that he planned on filing for divorce in May of 2018 after he had met Delaware residency requirements and could move out of their shared house. During this time, things were going well, particularly for Meredith Chapman, who had been offered a new job as the assistant vice president at Villanova University in Pennsylvania and moved to Radnor Township, Pennsylvania, which is part of the Main Line region. Meredith and her husband were getting divorced as well so that she could continue to follow her new relationship with Mark, and they could, in the end, be together. As Meredith and Mark's relationship continued to grow, Jenner started to see divorce lawyer Sheila Brennan, who said Jenner had a lot of bitterness and anger about being abandoned and replaced by a younger woman. Jenner also had many fears about being left financially insecure since she had just moved to a new location and had not found a new job, a year after losing her previous one. Things seemed to worsen for Jenner, and finally, all this had destroyed her mental health. Mark recommended that she see a psychiatrist and also asked her to seek support from family and friends, as she had even threatened to jump out of a window. Mark said she took the advice and seemed to have accepted the impending divorce. Jenner approached her husband one day with a list of requests for the weeks leading up to him officially moving out. Mark said he believed that they had gotten through the worst of things, but little did he know that this was far from the truth, and the worst was yet to come. Among the items on her list were going on hikes, having dinner, and generally spending some time together. Mark agreed to play along with Jenner's requests, stating it was odd. Over the next few weeks, Jenner also began posting on the neighborhood app Nextdoor, asking for recommendations for an excellent marriage counselor for a couple on the verge of divorce. She wrote, "We will need someone who is very educated and experienced in dealing with couples issues, including infidelity, depression, traumatic experiences, child-parent dynamics, and being accountable for one's actions." However, unbeknownst to others, Jenner had been secretly planning her revenge. On the evening of April 23, 2018, Mark and Jenner were scheduled to meet for dinner to discuss their divorce agreement. However, in a series of messages, Jenner informed her husband, who was already at the restaurant, that she was running late, before sending another text telling him to go home, she said. Jenner approached her husband one day with a list of requests for the weeks leading up to him officially moving out. Mark said he believed that they had gotten through the worst of things, but little did he know that this was far from the truth, and the worst was yet to come. Among the items on her list were going on hikes, having dinner, and generally spending some time together. Mark agreed to play along with Jenner's requests, stating it was odd. Over the next few weeks, Jenner also began posting on the neighborhood app Nextdoor, asking for recommendations for an excellent marriage counselor for a couple on the verge of divorce. She wrote, "We will need someone who is very educated and experienced in dealing with couples issues, including infidelity, depression, traumatic experiences, child-parent dynamics, and being accountable for one's actions." However, unbeknownst to others, Jenner had been secretly planning her revenge. On the evening of April 23, 2018, Mark and Jenner were scheduled to meet for dinner to discuss their divorce agreement. However, in a series of messages, Jenner informed her husband, who was already at the restaurant, that she was running late, before sending another text telling him to go home, she said. One day after the murder-suicide, the police received a tip from a person who said they had seen a woman wearing a trench coat, hat, sunglasses, and possibly a wig looking out at the house with binoculars. The police had also collected a set of car keys from the crime scene, which they determined belonged to a Cadillac that Jenner had rented. Mark said learning about the Cadillac came as a surprise, and he found out most of this information from the police and the news. Jenner had rented the Cadillac 2 weeks before the tragedy, and it was parked right outside their apartment. Mark continued to dig, poring over his wife's bank statements, phone records, and her computer backup, and found out that she was living a double life. After Mark admitted to the affair just after Valentine's Day, Jenner opened up a secret bank account and credit cards. She used the credit cards to purchase audio surveillance equipment, a lock-picking kit, computer hacking software, and DNA testing kits for his clothes. Mark also said she even bought sophisticated GPS tracking systems and attached them to both his and Meredith's cars. Mark stated that he believes there were over 400 images of private conversations he and Meredith had through text and Snapchat. Jenner would actually access his phone in the middle of the night. Mark continued that his best guess is that Jenner gained access while he was sleeping on the couch, and she placed his thumb on the thumb reader. On March 20, 2018, 5 weeks before the murder-suicide, Jenner's credit card statements revealed that she had practiced shooting the gun 3 times at a firing range. Mark said Jenner had planted multiple devices in his clothes and that he found files containing hundreds of hours of audio that his wife had recorded and even transcribed. Mark continued that Jenner had taken all his jackets and was cycling through a multitude of devices, sewing them in and out, downloading them back and forth, and she had been doing this for weeks. It came to light that on the night Jenner killed Meredith and herself, she had Jana emailed a letter to her family members, explaining her motive in a very chilling manner. She had started writing the letter weeks in advance, dating her entries, and expressing that this was payback for what he had done to her. A psychotherapist who studied homicide within marriages, and read Jana's letter suggested that Jana may have been pushed to kill Meredith and herself because losing the love of her life was something she could not tolerate. The psychotherapist stated that there was something about listening to the tapes that triggered rage and wound her up, and that at some point when she gave up on life and became suicidal, that's when she became her most dangerous. The psychotherapist got the sense that all of this was done to make him suffer and that Jana was interested in being the judge and jury in this scenario of her own life and her husband's life. In a televised TV interview, Mark revealed how his wife left a 15-page letter, stating how she would have killed him too had he walked in on the crime. Since the event, Mark said he wishes he handled the breakup with his wife differently, and that his regret comes back to breaking her heart and making her feel like she had no other choice. Mark said he has driven past Meredith's home several times as a way of trying to move forward, and that this has helped him come to terms with what happened so that he can let it go. The shockwaves of this story echoed through the neighborhood, leaving friends and neighbors grappling with the aftermath of a narrative that transcended the boundaries of typical suburban life. In the aftermath, the community came together, seeking solace and understanding, and grappling with the questions that lingered in the wake of this complex and heartbreaking tale. On September 29, 2006, in St. Patrick's Church in Glasgow, United Kingdom, detectives discovered the body of a young woman. Little did they know, this crime was just the tip of the iceberg. Their investigation led them to one of the most ruthless serial offenders in the country, Peter Tobin. Peter Tobin was born on August 27, 1946, in Johnstone, Scotland. He was the youngest of 8 children in the family of Marjorie and Daniel Tobin. Early on, Peter exhibited a difficult character, prompting his parents to send him to a boarding school in 1953 when he was just 7 years old. However, this seemingly did not yield much benefit. Later on, he was sent to a correctional institution. After completing this period, Peter moved to Brighton, England. There, he started a relationship with Margaret Mount, a 17-year-old typist who found his personality irresistible. In August 1969, they got married. However, Peter soon revealed his cruel and controlling nature. Besides that, he was involved in criminal activities and was convicted and imprisoned for theft and forgery a year later. This led Margaret to divorce him in 1973. In the same year, Peter married Sylvia Jeffrey, a local nurse who also fell for his charm. That year, they had their first son and named him Ian. Tragically, their daughter, Clara, died shortly after birth in 1974. Grieving over their lost child and suffering from Peter's abusive treatment, Sylvia left in 1976 with their young son. Decades later, when Peter was in his 40s, he pursued romance again, this time with Kathy Wilson, who was only 16 years old at the time, vulnerable and impressionable, which made it easy for him. Together, they had a son named Daniel, the couple's only child. They married in 1989 and moved to Scotland. It proved challenging, as Kathy couldn't go outside freely due to her husband's control over every aspect of her life. His violent behavior continued, reaching significant levels. Consequently, isolation exacerbated her living conditions. The young woman mustered the courage and chose to flee with her son in the late 1990s. It's uncertain if Kathy's departure triggered the worst aspects of the man's character to emerge. However, from this moment on, Peter unleashed a terrible side of himself upon the world, ready to cause much harm. Unfortunately, his path intersected with that of a lovely girl. Vicky Hamilton was born in Scotland in 1976. She was the second child of Michael and Janet Hamilton, a married couple who had previously welcomed their firstborn daughter, Sharon. Later, Lee and Lindsay joined the family. Nevertheless, serious disagreements between the spouses led to divorce, with separation being the most appropriate decision. Vicky, Lee, and Lindsay stayed under their mother's care and moved to South London, while the eldest daughter, Sharon, remained in Bathgate. However, this distance didn't hinder Vicky and Sharon from maintaining their close relationship. When Vicky turned 15, Sharon saw it as a good opportunity for her sister to take a step toward independence, a desire many teenagers have. After traveling alone by bus to Scotland for a weekend visit, Vicky was supposed to return home to her mother's house. It marked her first solo trip by bus. Sharon viewed it as a small yet significant adventure. On Saturday, February 9, 1991, the sisters went shopping and engaged in continuous conversation. Sunday was typical, except that Vicky felt apprehensive about her return trip. The evening of February 10th was cold and snowy. Vicky ensured she had enough money for the fare and reviewed the bus route one last time with her sister before they hugged each other tightly. Standing at the bus stop, snacking on a bag of chips across from the police station, it was there that Vicky's path fatefully crossed with Peter's. Peter forcibly dragged her into his car and committed unspeakable acts, raping her and then taking her life, either out of malice or to prevent her from reporting him. Peter retained possession of the girl's purse. When Vicky did not arrive at her mother's house and there was no communication from her, her family began searching for her frantically. In desperation, they simultaneously alerted the authorities about her absence. Once the police began investigating the disappearance, Vicky's face became one of the most recognizable in Scotland. The search operation grew into one of the largest in the country's history. Amidst this uproar, Peter opted to relocate to southeast England, specifically to Margate, where he settled into a charming house with a garden. There, Peter brought Vicky's lifeless body. He wrapped her remains in plastic and concealed them beneath a layer of concrete. He then covered everything with soil. Neighbors thought he had dug a sandbox for his young son, who was 3 years old at the time. Peter's name never surfaced during the initial investigation into Vicky's disappearance. The police found no leads on her whereabouts and considered her a likely runaway, viewing her as an unhappy teenager due to her parents' divorce. Their theory of voluntary disappearance was reinforced on February 21, 1991, when Vicky's purse was discovered near the main bus station in Edinburgh. Peter, always one step ahead of authorities, created this false lead and completely diverted the course of the investigation. Detectives spent 2 fruitless months searching in London. It is known that Vicky's mother died soon after. Over the next decade, Vicky's family and town residents continued to follow the case closely, but despite listing more than 7,000 names in the file, taking nearly 4,000 statements, and presenting about 500 documents along with 380 potential pieces of physical evidence, all efforts led to a dead end. The case was eventually shelved. The next young woman who encountered Peter was Dinah McNicol from Essex. She had a brother and 3 sisters. Her father was a jazz musician, and her mother had tragically died many years prior in a car accident. By age 18, Dinah was known as good-hearted and cheerful, a wonderful friend. She had just completed high school and held great hopes for her future. On one hand, she possibly aimed to take a gap year for travel. On the other hand, she aspired to attend university. However, nothing was certain because although Dinah had applied to several institutions of higher education, she hadn't yet received any responses. During the first weekend of August 1991, Dinah attended a music festival in Hampshire. There, she met a young man named David Tremlett. Between dances, they discovered they liked each other. On Sunday, August 4th, they spent the night together in a tent. The following day, Dinah assisted him in dismantling the tent, and they agreed to hitchhike back home separately. However, since part of their route was the same, they decided to hitchhike together. Tired but happy, the young couple hit the road to catch a ride. That's when Peter appeared and offered them a lift. David got out of the car first, and Dinah wrote down his phone number before saying goodbye. Alone with the unknown driver, Dinah was about to experience a real nightmare. On that same Monday, August 5, 1991, Peter repeated his previous crime. As with Vicky, he used Dinah's scarf as a gag. After committing the crime, Peter withdrew money from Dinah's account at ATMs in Hampshire and Sussex. When her relatives noticed someone withdrawing money from her account, they immediately suspected something was wrong. Her family knew how carefully she saved every penny and what she planned to use that money for, either traveling or continuing her education. Days and weeks went by with no word from Dinah. The worst part for her family was living in uncertainty. Though unspoken aloud, everyone was sure something terrible had happened. After all, if Dinah were alive, she would have returned home or called to explain her absence. As for Peter, he left Margate without saying goodbye or explaining anything. Later, in 1993, he settled in Hampshire, specifically in a rented apartment in Leek Park. He argued that he wanted to be closer to his son. On August 4, 1993, 14-year-olds went to visit a local woman but found she wasn't home. They decided to ask other neighbors if they had seen her around. Instead, they knocked on Peter's door. The man saw a unique opportunity and invited them into his home to wait for the woman they were looking for. The girls saw that the man's 5-year-old son was there and mistook him for a friendly person, so they agreed to enter. There is another version of the events suggesting it was not accidental. The two girls came to Peter's home in response to a request for a babysitter that the man had made. They trusted him because when they arrived, they saw his son and stayed to look after him. Everyone agrees that when the child fell asleep, Peter tied them up, threatened them with a knife, and forced them to drink alcohol. He then beat and raped them, injuring one of the girls. Just when they thought their lives would end at the hands of this extremely cruel man, the boy woke up. This saved them from suffering the same fatal fate that befell Vicky and Dinah. In an effort to keep his son from realizing what had happened and understanding what kind of father he was, Peter decided to leave the apartment with the child. According to some reports, Peter left around 2 a.m. But before that, he turned on the gas in the kitchen, hoping to complete his monstrous task. However, the girls regained consciousness and managed to escape. They went to the police and reported all the abuses committed by Peter, whom they described in detail. Peter returned his child to his mother and joined a religious sect called the Communion of Jesus under a false name. He hoped to go unnoticed there. In the meantime, the media published his photograph provided by the police, making his face widely known. Due to mass media coverage, information about this man started pouring in, and his car was also identified thanks to the BBC Crime Watch program. He was located, and after 40 days on the run, he was captured in Brighton. He appeared in court on May 18, 1994, where he pleaded guilty to sexual assault and indecent acts against 2 young girls and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. However, Peter did not serve his full sentence and was released in 2014 at the age of 58. Immediately after his release from prison, Peter went back to Scotland, aiming to relocate from the area where he was registered as a sex offender. For a while, he managed to stay off the radar. Under a false name and posing as a homeless person, he knocked on the door of the Church of St. Patrick in Glasgow. To avoid getting exposed, he adopted the name Peter McLaughlin. Dennis and Katie Curry, a married couple from the church's charitable group, recalled that evening vividly when a homeless man sought shelter. Despite his vulnerable appearance, Katie had an uneasy feeling about him. Peter was brought up as a Catholic and soon felt at ease in this church. His apparent begging served as an effective disguise because it only aroused sympathy from parishioners, with few paying much attention to him. Consequently, he roamed freely around the church, an ideal hiding place for him. However, his predatory instincts stayed intact, and being in a sacred place held no significance for him. Calculating every move meticulously, Peter displayed eagerness to assist in church repairs. After about 6 or 7 weeks, he asked the priest if he could join the maintenance staff. At that time, people facing financial difficulties often sought refuge in churches. It was through such circumstances that Angelica Clark crossed paths with Peter. Angelica was a 23-year-old woman from Poland who came to Scotland during the summer of 2006. She wanted to spend her summer break working to earn money and fund her language studies back home. She lived at the parish house of St. Patrick's Church, where she also worked as a cleaner. Peter took an immediate liking to her and somehow convinced her to help him with various tasks. Occasionally, on Sunday, September 24, 2006, Angelica spent several hours assisting him in painting a shed. Some parishioners noticed them together before Peter attacked her at the back of the chapel. Lato Brown, 47, and her husband, Andrew, 46, who lived in a multi-story house overlooking the church, heard a woman scream through their open windows. In her statement afterward, Leica described it as a brief scream that sounded like someone being forcibly restrained. It was so eerie that it compelled her to get up from the couch and approach the window, but she saw nothing. The scream heard by the Browns coincided with the moment when Peter caught the young girl off guard. As she stood with her back to him, he struck her forcefully and dragged her to the back of the chapel, where he continued to beat her. After she lost consciousness, he raped her and then inflicted several knife wounds. He hid the body in the basement under the floor near the confessional. At this point, Angelica was still alive. Several hours passed, and parishioners began to notice that the young girl was missing. That's when Dennis informed his wife, Katie, about Angelica's unusual disappearance. The police quickly initiated an investigation and started interviewing members of the community one by one. During these interviews, it came to light that Peter was the last person seen with Angelica, albeit disguised as Pete, a homeless laborer. Eventually, he became the prime suspect. Officers went to question him but found no evidence linking him directly to Angelica's disappearance, so they continued their investigation. Aware that it was only a matter of time before they discovered the body and traced everything back to him, Peter fled to London. By this time, Detective David Swindle had joined the investigation. He soon began to suspect that this case wasn't merely a disappearance. Based on their findings and collected testimonies, Detective Swindle believed it was unlikely Angelica would be found alive. Finally, on September 29, 2006, authorities discovered her body in the chapel. This news shocked British society due to both the nature of the crime and the location chosen by the perpetrator for hiding the body led Detective David to suspect that this wasn't Peter's first crime. However, he didn't yet know how horrific and dangerous this individual would turn out to be. Further revelations were inevitable. DNA found at the crime scene and on Angelica matched data in the United Kingdom's National Criminal Intelligence Database. That's when they learned exactly who they were dealing with, a man whose actions indicated deep-seated brutality and criminal sophistication. The individual they were looking for turned out to be Peter Tobin, whose fingerprints had been discovered at the crime scene. Consequently, the first step for the authorities was to publish his photograph in the media. His image was distributed nationwide, and the Scottish police reached out to the Metropolitan Police, initiating a search across the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, in London, Peter attempted to conceal himself by going to a hospital and pretending he had heart problems. He claimed he had chest pain and weakness on the left side of his body, identifying himself as a plumber named James Kelly. He was examined by Dr. Nick Lasso. However, something about his demeanor and behavior raised concerns for the doctor. Initially avoiding eye contact, a behavior atypical of most patients, Peter became suspicious when tests failed to reveal any clear physical cause for his alleged pain. The doctor's suspicions were confirmed by a nurse who recognized Peter from a photograph that had been circulating in the media. As a result, both the nurse and doctor contacted the police. This phone call significantly altered the course of the investigation. On September 30th, police officer Alan Murray was dispatched to the hospital in London. Peter was taken into a room so Alan could speak with him. Immediately following this encounter, Peter was arrested, although initially only charged with violating the sex offender registry. This approach allowed officers time to build a criminal case against him. Under Detective David's leadership, evidence gathered led to Peter's trial for crimes against Angelica in late March 2007. Despite substantial evidence against him, Peter denied committing violent acts against her, claiming instead they engaged in consensual sexual activity. He also denied providing false information to police and hospital staff. After 6 weeks of legal proceedings characterized by lies and manipulations on Peter's part, the truth finally prevailed. He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, but with the possibility of parole after 21 years. Detective David and his team were convinced that there was more to Peter's story. While the trial was ongoing, detectives delved into Peter's life. They gathered additional evidence and compiled a dossier. This was done with the involvement of various law enforcement agencies across the country. To avoid harming or interfering with Angelica's case, they preferred to conduct their work confidentially. The joint police operation was known as Operation Anagram. Part of their work involved connecting missing persons cases to places where Peter had been. During these investigations, they established 2 precise links, one in Bathgate and another in Margate. Several weeks later, a search was conducted in Peter's old house on the coast. They found a knife with DNA samples hidden in the attic, but there was nothing else there. Then they went to the house where Peter had lived in Margate. There, it became clear they were dealing with a serious criminal offender. Investigators dug up a sandbox in the garden of the house, one that Peter had made for his son, and, shockingly enough, they found a female body there. But that wasn't all. When they continued searching at the same location, they found another body. A woman's handbag was also discovered at the scene, which the team preserved for DNA analysis. Forensic experts worked diligently to establish the identities of the 2 victims, determine their ages, and estimate their dates of death. They also analyzed traces from them. These genetic traces were very strong but initially yielded no matches in the National DNA Database. However, on June 1, 2007, there was a crucial breakthrough. The DNA matched Peter's fingerprint. This development proved monumental for investigators, who deemed it necessary to move forward decisively in this direction. By November, on August 14, 2007, authorities confirmed that one of the bodies found belonged to Vicky Hamilton, who disappeared at 15 years old during her first independent outing. Her family had been waiting for answers for 16 years. Later, it was announced that the second body belonged to 18-year-old Dan McNichol, who was hitchhiking home after attending a concert. On September 1, 2008, the Royal Prosecution Service contacted Peter's lawyers and charged him with the murder of Vicky, leading to his trial. Officers had to restrain Vicky's father, Michael, after he saw Peter face to face. Michael later admitted he simply wanted Peter to know he was there to defend his daughter's name and protect her memory. After a month-long trial, on December 2, 2008, Peter was found guilty of Vicky's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The trial for Dina took place in December 2009. On December 16, after the defense failed to provide evidence exonerating their client, the jury found Peter guilty of Dina's murder. He subsequently received his third life sentence. On November 22, 2007, it was reported that Tobin had been attacked by fellow inmates. He sustained minor injuries. Shortly before this incident, the serial killer had confessed to a total of 11 murders. Recently, on October 8, 2012, Peter passed away in the hospital. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Alan Wade. High school sweethearts James Reggie Sway and Carol Alford hailed from Charleston, South Carolina. They grew up together, same school, same grade, knowing each other since childhood. Over time, their friendship evolved into something deeper. By 1959, at 15 years old, they were dating. Friends often remarked on how harmonious and beautiful James and Carol seemed together. They captured these moments in photos, young and happy with dreams of a long and joyful life ahead. It was their first deep connection. The pair became almost inseparable, both in school and out. They seriously thought about marriage once they turned 18, a decision supported by their parents. But life had other plans. In 1962, just after graduating high school, James was drafted into military service. He and Carol decided to delay their wedding until his return and promised to exchange letters regularly. Time moved on, and separation became lengthy. By the mid-60s, James found himself deployed to Vietnam, a hotspot, and all contact was lost thereafter. Carol had no word if her beloved was even alive. Carol faced significant challenges in her life starting when he stopped writing to her. She chose to further her education while simultaneously securing employment at the Charleston Air Force Base. Eventually, Carol married, but this first marriage ended quickly without any children. In 1975, she entered into a second marriage with Richard Alford, and in 1977, they had a daughter named Rhonda. Unfortunately, the second marriage also proved unsuccessful due to Richard's excessive drinking and physical abuse. By the mid-1980s, Carol could no longer endure the ongoing abuse. She took her daughter and filed for divorce. However, Richard continued to harass and pursue her relentlessly. In 1987, his behavior reached a critical point. Richard purchased a handgun, consumed a large amount of alcohol, and went to confront Carol. On that fateful day, Richard rang Carol's doorbell. She unsuspectingly opened the door while Rhonda was in the room behind her. Despite his daughter's presence, Richard drew his gun and shot Carol multiple times in front of Rhonda. He then left the scene, drove to a deserted area, and committed suicide by shooting himself. Carol was fortunate to survive due to neighbors hearing the gunshots and Rhonda's desperate cries for help. They promptly called for an ambulance and alerted the police. Carol was in critical condition after losing significant blood. She underwent numerous complex surgeries and blood transfusions over several days before beginning her recovery. Although she gradually regained strength, she became permanently blind in her right eye and disabled for life. Toward the late 1990s, Carol's health deteriorated seriously once more. She experienced severe weight loss along with persistent pain and weakness, which prompted a thorough medical examination at the hospital. Despite enduring these substantial physical and emotional hardships throughout her life, Carol's resilience shone through as she navigated each challenge thrown her way. In 1987, Carol received a distressing diagnosis of liver cancer. During her treatment, she was inadvertently infected with the hepatitis C virus, which went undetected and untreated. The virus silently damaged her liver over the years, ultimately leading to cancer. However, due to appropriate treatment and supportive therapy, Carol's condition was stabilized. She was required to take her prescribed medications daily for the rest of her life and undergo regular medical checkups to make necessary adjustments to her treatment plan. Carol faced additional challenges after losing her job at the Air Force Base due to severe gunshot wounds. With the added burden of cancer, she was no longer able to perform physically demanding tasks or remain on her feet for extended periods. Consequently, she took a position as a call center operator for a cable TV company in Charleston, her hometown. On the other hand, James experienced his own set of hardships in Vietnam. He was severely wounded during the war and almost lost his leg, requiring a prolonged hospital stay. His name was mistakenly included in lists of the deceased, leading even his relatives to believe he had died. Fortunately, he survived and eventually returned home. Years later, by that time, he had lost contact with Carol. She had moved residences, married, and believed that James had perished in the conflict. Although James later married, severe injuries from the war led to diabetes and several chronic conditions, which prevented him from becoming a father. His marriage ended after a few years, leaving him living alone since then. He found employment as a laborer on the local railroad but expected no further pleasant surprises from life. In the fall of 2000, while Carol was performing her duties at the call center, answering phones and providing customer advice, she encountered another caller whose voice sounded unnervingly familiar. This voice elicited an emotional response within her that she could not ignore. Carol immediately recognized her first high school love, but she was hesitant to act on it because she believed James was dead. She answered all the customer's questions and then suddenly turned to him, saying his full name. Silence hung in the air for a moment. The man timidly asked how she knew his name. Carol began to cry and responded that she was the girl he had dated in high school, the girl he once wanted to marry. For the next few moments, they both cried into the phone, unable to find words. They soon discovered that they still lived in their hometown and agreed to meet the next evening, meeting again after 38 years. According to Rhonda's recollection, her mother came home from work that day looking excited, like a schoolgirl, and talking nonstop about James. The next day, Carol prepared diligently for the date, trying on dresses, doing her hair and makeup. She realized that she was no longer the young beauty James remembered but wanted to look her best and win back his heart. Their reunion was exciting. They hadn't seen each other in 38 years. They talked endlessly about everything, the highlights and sorrows of their lives, failed marriages, work issues, and health problems. Reminiscing about their happy times together, their old feelings reignited, and James and Carol were eager to make up for lost time. They began seeing each other daily and decided just a couple of weeks later to live together. 5 months later, they married, and Carol moved into her new husband's home in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood. Family life brought its own set of joys and challenges. The couple first resided in their native Charleston, South Carolina. In love and happy, they engaged in everyday life activities and took care of each other, especially since both were aging with health concerns. Next door lived the Cole family, a longtime acquaintance of James's. Stephen Cole had also served in Vietnam, where he was severely wounded and now used a wheelchair. His wife, Natalie, seemed often absent due to work commitments and preferred socializing with friends over spending time at home, often at a bar somewhere. Their daughter, Tiffany, would typically hang around on the street with nothing to do and no money for even small pocket expenses. When James and Carol first started living together, Tiffany was still in high school. Good-natured Carol immediately felt a connection with the neighbor girl. She genuinely felt sorry for Tiff, who seemed unwanted by her own mother. Over 5 years, Carol did everything possible to support Tiffany. Carol invited her to family lunches and dinners, where delicious food was served, periodically bought clothes for the girl, and even provided small amounts of money for minor expenses. Carol treated Tiffany like she was her own daughter, surrounding her with care and attention. In 2004, the Summoners decided to sell their Chevrolet aluminum minivan. Tiffany expressed interest in buying it through installments since she had no money but desperately needed the car. The couple decided to sell it to her at a very low price and divided the payment into manageable amounts stretched over a whole year. Early in 2005, the Sewers decided to relocate to Florida due to health issues that had significantly worsened for both spouses. Doctors advised them to move south, near the ocean, for better health conditions. By then, both were retired, so they chose to make this significant life change. Carol and James sold their spacious home in Charleston and bought property in Jacksonville, the largest city in Florida, where they also purchased a new Lincoln Town car. The couple was extremely happy and settled into their new place while making plans for their future life together. Every day, Carol called her adult daughter, Rhonda. She shared everything about what was going on in her life, thoughts and plans included. So when communication ceased, Rhonda was both surprised and deeply concerned. In June 2005, Rhonda became concerned when her mother failed to call her as usual and didn't answer her calls either. Initially, she pushed away negative thoughts and hoped everything was fine with her mom and stepdad. She thought they might get in touch soon. However, the following day brought no change in the situation. Rhonda called both her mother's and James's cell phones every half hour, but they were now unreachable, and voicemail messages went unanswered. On the third day, Rhonda decided it was time to take action. She chose to drive to another state to personally check if her mother and stepfather were all right. She started early in the morning for a 5-hour drive to reach the Summers home. Upon arrival, the first thing she noticed was that their car was missing, which seemed unusual. Approaching the front door, she found it slightly open. Inside, the house was eerily quiet despite a light being on in one of the rooms while sunlight streamed outside. Rhonda called out loudly for her mother and James but heard nothing in response. Entering the kitchen next, she saw a table set for two with food that appeared untouched for at least 3 days. It looked like they were about to have dinner but abruptly left it unfinished. The house itself was in disarray, things were scattered around randomly, and some doors and cupboards were open as if someone had frantically searched through them. Rhonda's concern grew when she spotted crucial medications on a bedside table in their bedroom, her mother's cancer pills, taken 3 times daily, and James's insulin, administered hourly, remained there untouched, along with completely dead phones. Given these observations, medications left behind, and no cell phone usage, it became clear that her mother and stepfather couldn't have gone far or been away for long without these essentials. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Rhonda immediately contacted the police to report their disappearance under what seemed like strange circumstances. The couple's vehicle was promptly included on the wanted list, and all bank cards belonging to Carol and James were blocked. The same day, the initial days of the search yielded no significant results. It was impossible to locate either the Sewers themselves or any witnesses. However, on June 12, several events transpired simultaneously, enabling the police to pick up the trail of the criminals. Firstly, a man phoned one of the banks, identified himself as Mr. James Sewer, and complained about his card being blocked, making it impossible for him to withdraw cash. Upon verifying the card information, the bank employee immediately suspected something was amiss. The employee suggested that Mr. Sewer personally visit the nearest bank branch to resolve the issue, but the man abruptly hung up. A few minutes later, from the same number, yet directed at another bank, a woman identifying herself as Mrs. Carol Sewer called and reported a similar problem with her card being blocked. When she was asked to visit the bank in person, she categorically refused, citing health reasons and emphasizing her immediate need for access to her funds. Naturally, this request was denied. The information regarding these calls and recordings of them were immediately handed over to law enforcement. The same day at the station, these recordings were played for Rhonda, who confidently stated that neither voice belonged to her mother or stepfather. This was evident from the outset, as both individuals were in their 60s, while the voices sounded much younger. Police promptly hypothesized that these imposters were directly connected to the disappearance of the Sewers. They suspected that either these individuals had kidnapped Carol and James and were holding them somewhere against their will, or had possibly killed them after coercing information about their bank accounts and cards. A few days later, the missing couple's car was discovered abandoned on a deserted road in a wooded area. There were no traces of blood or signs of struggle in the cabin. Experts found hair and sweat marks in the trunk, which belonged to both spouses. It became evident that the owners had been taken away in the trunk of their own car, and the prospects of finding them alive were grim. Upon examining the couple's bank transactions, it was revealed that money had been withdrawn from their cards several times after they ceased contacting their daughter. Reviewing the ATM surveillance footage showed that a young man, who couldn't be identified immediately, made the withdrawals. Additionally, a request was made to trace all calls from the number used by the imposters to contact the bank. The SIM card itself was purchased with prepaid time shortly before the disappearance of the couple. Attempts to establish the beer's identity failed. However, it was discovered that on June 6, a call was made from this number to a car rental company. It turned out that a guest at one of the hotels rented a Mazda RX-8 under the name Tiffany Cole. This same car was subsequently driven by an unidentified young man who withdrew money from ATMs using cards belonging to the missing individuals. He withdrew $1,000 from one card and nearly $3,000 from another. Thanks to built-in location trackers in rental cars, investigators determined that this Mazda RX-8 had parked at a hotel in Charleston. A capture team was promptly patched in and forcefully entered the room where these individuals were staying. The room was strewn with packages and receipts from various stores, including clothes, gadgets, video games, cosmetics, perfumes, and expensive alcohol. Inside were three individuals: 23-year-old Tiffany Cole, her 24-year-old boyfriend Michael Jackson, and 19-year-old Alan Lyndall Wade. The young men appeared surprised and confused as police placed handcuffs on their wrists. All three individuals were taken to the police station and placed in separate rooms for questioning. Initially, they pretended not to understand the accusations against them or simply remained silent. A search of their room uncovered several items belonging to the summoners, including their bank cards, a laptop, some of Carol's jewelry, James's expensive coin collection, keys to their Lincoln Town car, and pawn shop receipts in the name of Cole. It was discovered that part of the stolen jewelry had been pawned by Tiffany, and the money spent with friends. After several hours of interrogation and upon being presented with irrefutable evidence found in the hotel room, Tiffany was the first to speak. She sobbed as she revealed that she and her friends had robbed the elderly couple but insisted they did nothing further to them. They then fled and started spending other people's money. Tiffany also admitted that there was another accomplice, a 19-year-old named Bruce Kent Nixon, who was paid $300 for his help. They never saw him again after that. Indeed, Bruce had agreed to participate in the crime for a promised payment. Afterward, he spent all the money on illegal substances. Finding him wasn't difficult, as he lived in Charleston and had not attempted to flee or hide. He was arrested at his parents' house. A careless phrase led Bruce to realize how serious the consequences could be for his involvement. Consequently, he agreed to cooperate with the authorities to avoid facing the death penalty. What he revealed was horrifying. It all started in May 2005 when Tiffany went to deliver a payment for a car bought 6 months prior from the summoners. She often visited them personally because hospitable Carol and James invited her to stay for a night or a few days, offered delicious food, and even gave gifts if she brought friends along. There was always space for guests in the house and at their table. This time, Tiffany showed up with her new boyfriend, and they were warmly invited to dinner. Since it was late, the couple ended up staying overnight at the summoners' home. During the meal, the summoners discussed how they had settled into their new place. Carol inadvertently mentioned that they had nearly $100,000 left after selling their house in Charleston, implying they could comfortably enjoy their retirement without any financial worries. With this revelation, Carol unwittingly sealed her and her husband's fate. Tiffany and Michael exchanged looks. That night, while still at the couple's house, they began plotting how to obtain that substantial amount of money. In the morning, Tiffany and Michael bid farewell and returned to South Carolina. Over the next 2 weeks, they found accomplices, assigned roles and responsibilities, and began executing their plan. On June 6, Tiffany rented an inconspicuous car while Bruce and Alan stole 4 shovels from an unspecified location. Together, they drove to a secluded spot in the suburbs of Jacksonville and started digging a deep hole intended as the grave for the summoner couple. On July 8, Tiffany purchased rope and duct tape from a hardware store and handed these materials over to her accomplices. That evening, Bruce and Alan arrived at the prospective victim's home under the pretense of needing assistance and asked if they could make a phone call from inside. Despite finding them strange, Carol decided to let them in. Thinking they genuinely needed help once inside, Bruce and Alan immediately attacked Carol and her husband. When he responded to her screams, they bound the couple's hands and feet with duct tape, blindfolded them, and demanded information about any money or valuables in the house under threats of torture and death. The summoners provided details of their bank accounts and PIN codes for their cards in hopes of being spared. However, once this information was obtained by the intruders, two additional accomplices entered the house. They helped drag Carol and her husband into their backyard before stuffing them into the trunk of their family car. Alan drove their Lincoln with Bruce seated beside him, while Tiffany and Michael followed close behind in a red Mazda RX-8 as part of their sinister plan. While on their way, they encountered a police patrol that might have tried to stop the car with the couple in the trunk. The second car was supposed to divert attention by speeding up or blatantly breaking rules. However, no one appeared in their path, so both cars reached the destination safely. In the trunk, James managed to free his arm. He removed the bandage and duct tape from his face and also from his wife's face to prevent suffocation. There wasn't much more they could do. Their surprise, bewilderment, and shock were immense when the trunk lid opened, and among their captors were Tiffany and her boyfriend, who had recently visited them. The captives were led several dozen meters through the woods to a prepared grave. They were then simply pushed into it. The couple pleaded desperately for their lives, but the young criminals proceeded otherwise. They killed the couple in a brutal manner by burying them alive. According to Bruce, it took about an hour for them to cover the bound elderly people with earth while they cried, confessed their love for each other, and said goodbye. An examination later showed that the spouses died of suffocation. Pieces of soil in which they were buried were found in their mouths, respiratory tracts, and even stomachs. After completing this gruesome act, the outlaws abandoned the Lincoln in the woods and returned to town in a rented car. They went to the Summers house, where they took valuable items and then returned to South Carolina to start spending their loot. However, after 2 days, all stolen cards were blocked. 4 days later, all participants in the crime were taken into custody. Bruce Nixon was the only one who fully admitted his guilt from the beginning and agreed to cooperate with investigators, hoping for leniency. He revealed where the spouses were buried and detailed everything that happened on that awful night. Tiffany claimed that her boyfriend Michael had lost his mind and initiated the crime when he heard about the substantial amount of money retained by the summoners after the sale of the house. Her lawyer argued that the girl was an accomplice and not directly involved in the murder herself. Jackson and Lyndall opted to stay silent, but the collected evidence was compelling. The jury didn't think Tiffany Cole's innocence since she participated in creating the criminal plan, rented a car, and devised a diversionary tactic if they were chased by police. She even helped dig a grave for the spouses. Furthermore, she pawned stolen items and joyfully spent money, as evidenced by numerous photos of her in purchased clothes and in a limousine rented to celebrate their illicit success. As a result, Bruce Nixon was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Jackson, Tiffany, and Lyndall received the death penalty. Despite filing multiple appeals and grievances, all were denied, leaving the sentence unchanged. However, in 2023, 18 years after their heinous crime, that very same death sentence had yet to be carried out. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nicole Ford. Manipulation is a special psychological technique that allows one to achieve personal goals without considering the partner's interests. Notably, a skilled manipulator keeps people they need close to them. For years, using various tactics, methods, and approaches in intimate relationships, such manipulation usually makes the other party doubt the correctness of their decisions, feel guilty, and can significantly undermine their self-esteem. Typically, relationships with a manipulator start off ideally, as these individuals know how to gain trust, charm, and win hearts. They appear caring, understanding, empathetic, and someone with whom one can share joys and sorrows at any time. Gradually, they probe your weaknesses and begin to exploit them. Sometimes, such individuals even commit serious crimes through others in such a way that the manipulated person believes they are acting entirely of their own volition or for the greater good. The case of Nicole is not unique, but it serves as a vivid example of how a man can skillfully manipulate the emotions of women who are in love with him. He kept one lover from leaving for many years, destroying her emotional state with his actions and convincing her that she could not live without him. He persuaded another lover to commit a crime, convincing her it was a righteous act to save a child. He planned everything down to the last detail, but recordings from street surveillance cameras did not allow him to escape accountability. What is known about Nicole, or simply Nicole Ford, is that she was born on July 11, 1989, in the northern part of the U.S., in a small town in Minnesota. There was almost no information about her parents and early life in public sources. According to some reports, her father left the family when she was very young, and her mother raised her alone, striving to provide her daughter with everything necessary and a good education. Nicole was one of the top students in her school, and she was also actively involved in sports from a young age, particularly track and field and martial arts, in which she excelled. In her senior years of school, she decided that she wanted to dedicate her life to fighting crime and would serve in law enforcement. She did everything possible to successfully pass the exams and meet the physical standards required for admission to the police academy. Graduating with honors after finishing school and being admitted to the academy, Nicole moved from the small provincial town to the large metropolis of Minneapolis. In 2010, she was accepted into the Criminal Investigation Department of the Maine Police Headquarters in Minneapolis as an assistant investigator, and after several years of dedicated service, she was appointed as an investigator. Colleagues described her as a determined, goal-oriented woman and a fearless officer ready to take risks. However, in her personal life, without realizing it, Nikki became a pawn in the hands of a sophisticated manipulator. The perfect start to a doomed relationship began in 2012 at a Taekwondo competition, where 23-year-old Nicole met a coach and martial arts master, Timothy Tim Amema, who was 8 years her senior and initially didn't spark much interest in her. However, the slender young beauty with luxurious long hair and a charming smile immediately caught his attention. It's worth noting that Timothy was known as a ladies' man, with numerous romantic partners whom he frequently changed, and sometimes dated several women at the same time. He was skilled in winning over women he liked and was not accustomed to rejections. Timothy also lived in Minneapolis, quickly found out where Nikki trained, and obtained her phone number. He initially offered her personal training services but almost immediately began courting her, quickly winning over her heart. Nicole saw Tim as a kind, open, and charming man. She developed a sincere affection for him, and before she knew it, she had fallen deeply in love. Soon, they started a romantic relationship and began dating. Initially, the man behaved gallantly, showed care, and made every effort to impress her. Effort to demonstrate that he was a reliable person one could depend on. Amema was strong, intelligent, eloquent, and had the ability to dominate the women who fell in love with him. The relationship progressed rapidly, and after a month and a half, they decided to move in together and live under the same roof. The first 6 months went wonderfully, and Nicole felt happy and loved next to this person. She opened up and trusted him, believing there were no secrets between them. However, Timothy's behavior gradually began to change. He revealed his true nature, but he did so subtly enough that his chosen one was not alarmed for quite some time. The sophisticated tormentor, Timothy, was an attractive, witty, and charismatic man with a muscular build, enjoying success with the opposite gender. He took great pride in himself, and even after entering into a serious relationship, he did not stop flirting with other women, often doing so in Nicole's presence, which deeply hurt her and made her feel humiliated. At first, Nicole hoped that over time her boyfriend would shake off his bachelor habits, become more restrained, and settle down. But months passed, and nothing changed. Meanwhile, Tim assured her that he loved only her and was passionate and tender as a partner. But outside the home, he did not miss a single opportunity to flirt and regularly engaged in affairs. Soon, Tim became openly annoyed by his girlfriend's jealousy. He began to snap at her, stating that he would behave as he wanted and she had no right to tell him otherwise. However, he usually apologized afterward, telling Nicole that no one would ever love her as much as he did, and she forgave him, continuing to make future plans. In the fall of 2014, during a minor domestic argument, Timothy unexpectedly flew into a rage, grabbed Nicole by the throat, and squeezed so hard that she couldn't breathe and almost lost consciousness. Suddenly, He came to his senses, let Nicole go, and pushed her so hard that she fell, hitting a wall. At that moment, she realized that this was an unhealthy relationship that needed to be ended immediately. However, her emotional attachment to the man was too strong, and it only took another apology from him for her to forgive him. In addition to bouts of aggression and infidelity, another extremely unpleasant trait of Tim's came to light. He was extremely jealous and obsessed with control. The man monitored every step his chosen one took her phone without permission, checked her contact lists, messages in messengers and social networks, and kept a close eye on who she talked to and where she was. This continued for several years. Tim could cause a scandal out of nowhere, unjustly accusing his beloved of infidelity while he himself did not miss an opportunity to be unfaithful. He often resorted to physical violence but continued to convince Nicole that no one would ever love her as he did. If she ever attempted to leave, the man resorted to blackmail, claiming that he would end his life and it would be on her conscience. In November 2015, after another argument that ended in violence, Nicole packed her bags and, with a suitcase in hand, left the house. Timothy, who until the last moment did not believe she would do it, saw his parting leaving, chased her down outside, grabbed her by the hair, and dragged her back into the house. But the woman began to scream and struggle, attracting the attention of neighbors, and the man was forced to back down, letting her go. After so many years in an abusive and manipulative relationship, Nicole could finally breathe a sigh of relief. However, Tim had no intention of leaving her alone. He merely switched tactics, moving from threats and blackmail back to romantic pursuits. He met her after work, sent flowers to her home, wrote messages filled with tenderness, and pleaded for a chance to start over. For over a month, Nicole was resolute and had no plans to return to her former lover, but in December of that same year, she unexpectedly discovered that she was pregnant. This was certainly not in her plans, but the thought of not keeping the baby never crossed her mind. She knew that if her ex-boyfriend found out about her pregnancy, it would provide him with perfect leverage for manipulation in an attempt to win her back. So, she tried to hide her pregnancy but was unsuccessful. They still shared many mutual friends and acquaintances, so by January 2016, information about her expecting a child reached Timothy. There was no doubt about who the father was, prompting him to urge her to return to him, arguing that their child should be raised in a complete family. Nicole, who had grown up without a father herself, understood how challenging it would be for her and the baby. But she also realized that a life with a manipulative and cruel person would not lead to anything good. She adamantly refused to return to her ex-boyfriend, though she still had feelings for him. However, she noted that she would allow him to participate in the life and upbringing of their child as a nominal father. On June 20, 2016, Nicole gave birth to a healthy boy whom she named Callahan, as her former lover acknowledged paternity and declared his readiness to raise the child with her. However, it soon became clear that giving the baby this man's surname and registering him as the parent was far from the best idea. Despite Tim's assurances that he would be a good father and his pleas to reunite so that Callahan could grow up in a complete family, in reality, he showed no interest in his son. The man had hoped that the child would become a reliable tool for manipulating his ex-girlfriend, but Nicole was no longer susceptible and quickly lost interest in the baby. Nicole took nearly a year of maternity leave and devoted herself entirely to caring for her little son. She hadn't even thought about new relationships, immersing herself completely in motherhood. Meanwhile, Timothy continued his carefree life with numerous lovers and casual connections. It got to the point where he had a signal, a purple light in his bedroom, which meant that the homeowner was alone and expecting company. Any of his lovers could respond to this signal, and afterward, the purple light would go out, signaling to others that Tim's bed was already taken. It was like something out of a red light district, but the man and his numerous partners were quite satisfied with this arrangement. In the same year of 2016, shortly after the birth of Callahan, 36-year-old Emma moved in and began living with his 18-year-old protege named Colleen. He had been training the young woman since she was 14, and she was deeply in love with her mentor, despite the significant age difference. Initially, the couple hid their close relationship, and to outsiders, they claimed that Colleen was just renting a room in his house. However, it soon became apparent to everyone that a fiery romance was unfolding between the coach and his ward. Timothy was thrilled with his young lover, and according to friends, the girl resembled a naive child trying her hardest to impress the man she absolutely adored. By the summer of 2017, Nicole was forced to return to work. She was raising her child alone, as the boy's father was hardly any help, and the young mother simply ran out of money, prompting her to end her maternity leave early. At that time, she was working as a forensic expert at the main police headquarters in Minneapolis, and her work schedule could be unpredictable. During the day, little Callahan was in daycare, but if his mother was held up at work or called in unexpectedly, she would ask Timothy to look after their son. There were a few reasons for this. First, she believed it was beneficial for the boy to spend time with his father, who had recently vowed to be involved in his upbringing. Second, since her former lover was not helping financially, she thought he could at least save her the cost of nanny services. However, Amma did not enjoy spending time with the child. It was a burden to him, and he was unwilling to take on the responsibility. Thus, he shifted it, along with all related troubles, onto his young lover, Colleen. Quickly developing a fondness for the little boy, she loved taking care of him. Thus, the man dumped his parental responsibilities on the girl, explaining it by telling her that Nicole was a bad mother who did not want to care for her child and was looking for any excuse to offload her son onto them. In the spring of 2017, Nicole, for the first time since breaking up with Tim, entered into a romantic relationship. Her new partner was a fellow police officer named Donovan Ford. He treated his beloved with tenderness and care and also felt paternal towards Callahan, expressing readiness to adopt the boy. Everything seemed wonderful, but that was until Amma found out about his ex's new relationship. Timothy did not love Nicole and had long stopped trying to establish any relationship with her, but the mere fact that she was now not alone and happy enraged him. It also ignited a furious desire to annoy or completely destroy these relationships. As his main weapon in this endeavor, he decided to use their son, as well as the naive Colleen, who believed every word he said. The child's father regularly reported to social services that Donovan was beating, tormenting, and treating his son cruelly, and that the boy's mother was doing nothing to stop it. As a result, Child Protective Services frequently visited the family. They never managed to confirm any instance of domestic violence, but each time, Nicole and her new lover were interrogated like criminals. They knew who was trying to ruin their lives but were powerless to stop it, and this continued for years. Simultaneously, Timothy kept convincing Colleen that Callahan was in danger, that Nikki and Donovan were cruel to him, and that one day they might simply end his life in what they would claim was an accident. The girl believed her lover and felt terribly sorry for the boy, who had literally grown up before her eyes, and was ready to protect him. Timothy literally harassed his ex and her new partner, threatened them, tried to provoke them, and even filed police reports claiming that these law enforcement officers were abusing their official powers, hoping they would be fired, and awarded sole custody to the mother. Nicole was about to breathe a sigh of relief, but Timothy persisted and appealed the decision. Initially, he secured the right to see the child once a week under the mother's supervision, and later he was allowed to spend time alone with the boy without Nicole's presence, which greatly upset and frightened her, as anything could be expected from him. Ultimately, after several more court appeals, and to avoid further disputes, Timothy was allowed to see his son at a specialized family center designed to prevent parents in conflict from encountering each other and causing further psychological damage to the children. The facility had multiple separate parking lots and separate entrances, so one parent could bring the child for the other parent to meet, but the ex-spouses did not interact or even see each other. The mysterious attacker. On April 19, 2022, when Nicole arrived at the family center to pick up her son after another visit with his father, something unforeseen happened. She parked her car and was heading towards the entrance, but she didn't make it inside. Suddenly, a person dressed in black clothing, a mask, and a hood approached her, pulled out a gun, and shot her 4 times at close range, then quickly disappeared in an unknown direction in a black pickup. Incredibly, Nicole not only remained conscious but also managed to dial emergency services. However, she couldn't convey anything to the dispatcher. One of the bullets hit her neck, missing the carotid artery by a millimeter and damaging her vocal cords, so she could only make gurgling sounds. At that moment, A woman who happened to witness the event came to her aid. She was just passing by when she heard the shots and saw the fleeing black figure jump into a vehicle and disappear. The woman quickly pulled over, made sure the shooter had left, and then rushed to help the victim. She was the one who explained to the dispatcher what had happened, provided the address, and pressed her clothing against Nicole's wounds to stop the bleeding, saving her life. The victim spent several days teetering on the brink of life and death in a coma. She lost a lot of blood, and her vital organs were affected, but despite the severity of her injuries, doctors managed to stabilize her condition. Medical professionals believed Nicole was incredibly lucky, as death was only millimeters away from two bullets. One passed near an artery, and the other nearly struck her heart. The woman survived, and now it was necessary to figure out who wanted her dead. Prime suspect. Nicole had no doubt that her ex-lover was the one who had shot her, which she reported to the police as soon as she regained consciousness. Earlier, while the woman was in a coma, Donovan had also informed the police that, apart from Timothy, the victim had no other enemies. Timothy was indeed interrogated and checked first, but he had a solid alibi, as he was at the family center with his son at the time of the attack, confirmed by staff and internal surveillance footage. Simultaneously, the theory was investigated that someone among the criminals she had previously arrested and helped incarcerate could have organized the attack on the police officer and investigator. Undoubtedly, due to her profession, she could have had ill wishes against her, but Nicole herself was convinced that Timothy was involved in the assassination attempt. At the scene, 4 casings were found, and a camera at the nearest intersection captured a suspicious black Dodge Ram pickup running red light without license plates. This same vehicle was mentioned by the eyewitness who essentially saved the victim's life. Thus, it was necessary to check what vehicles Timothy owned. During another interrogation, the suspect mentioned that he had a Chevrolet Traverse SUV in his garage and that he also owned a Dodge Challenger. However, according to Timothy, he never had a pickup. Yet the investigation showed that the man was lying, and a black Dodge Ram identical to the one used by the shooter was registered in his name. Once the truth emerged, Timothy was arrested pending further investigation. When shown the surveillance footage, he recalled that he did indeed have such a vehicle but claimed he rarely used it and that it mostly sat idle. Moreover, he noted that his pickup had colorful stickers on the doors and hood. This was verified, and indeed his vehicle had stickers, but they looked as though they had been applied just recently. Nonetheless, all the evidence was circumstantial, and law enforcement needed to find the weapon and the actual shooter to fully resolve the case. It turned out that Timothy's vehicle was equipped with a satellite navigation system, which allowed the tracing of the vehicle's entire route on that day. It was discovered that the car was brought to the back entrance of a school on the evening of April 18th. There it remained all night and almost the entire next day. Road cameras traced that the vehicle arrived there with license plates, but by the next evening, it left without them. The person who used the vehicle that day was of short stature, slight build, and from a distance, the silhouette appeared feminine. As a result, it was decided to immediately detain and interrogate Timothy's living girlfriend, Colin Larson. A search was also conducted at the couple's home, and although the weapon used in the crime was not found, law enforcement discovered ammunition of the same caliber used by the shooter. The frightened girl almost immediately began to give confessional testimony, confirming that Timothy was the mastermind behind the crime. However, Colin believed that her lover had acted with good intentions, thinking they were trying to radically save little Callahan from a cruel mother. Timothy had spent years manipulating his trusting young girlfriend, convincing her that the boy was being mistreated and subjected to violence, and she unquestioningly believed every word her lover said. She felt immensely sorry for the child and believed that Timothy wished his son well and wanted to protect him. The trial of the conspirators began in November of the same year. Colin confessed that her lover had provided her with the firearm and had taken the pistol back after the assassination attempt and disposed of it, but she did not know what exactly he did with it. The prosecution was largely built on circumstantial evidence, a point that the defendant's lawyers emphasized. Nevertheless, the decisive factor was Colin's confession, who still could not believe that her lover had deceived her and believed that they were committing a righteous act. The court also considered the testimony of the victim herself about what kind of person Timothy was and how skillfully he had always managed to manipulate the women who loved him. 42-year-old Timothy was found guilty of organizing a first-degree attempted murder, as well as incitement, aiding, and abetting. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison, the maximum term for such cases. 24-year-old Colin Larson, as the executive, received 16 years in prison. A year after the assassination attempt, Nicole managed to fully recover physically and emotionally. She and Donovan officially legalized their relationship, and the man became the best father Callahan could ever wish for. The now married couple is expecting their first child together, and the woman who saved Nicole's life then will be the child's godmother. Finally, it should be added that Timothy, with good behavior, will be eligible for parole in 2035. However, he will be prohibited from coming within 100 meters of his son, former lover, and her family members, and from attempting any form of contact with them.